The maritime heritage of Lancaster has been celebrated with a first-rate festival based around the excellent little maritime museum in the old custom house on St George's Quay. Always under threat, as have been other events which would bring much needed tourists to the city by the ill-considered funding policies of Lancaster City Council, it may not survive for much longer. When you consider what other cities with a dock or a water asset such as Bristol, Cardiff and Exeter, and the thousands of people who attend their maritime events, Lancaster City Council's policy seems short-sighted at the minimum.
The Temple of Denial is full of fakery and hot air.
Only 50 trains.
The Cabinet of Curiosities! Finest show at the fair! Only 50 pence trade tokens!
Even the sedan chair races?
Not as of yet, no.
It's a heavy blow, steady tread, working like the devil keep the bones.
The railways played an important part in the industrial development of the city, with Lancaster once having two stations, Lancaster Castle and Green Air. Castle Station, always a haven for train spotters, is still a mainline stopping point on the London to Scotland route. In the 18th and early 19th century, Green Air used to be the site of Brockbank's flourishing boat building business. Notice how in this 1806 drawing, the old bridge is being demolished to allow the tall ships to move farther upriver. And eventually Green Air railway station was built as a junction on the Morecambe to Leeds line. It crossed the river via the Greyhound Bridge, and today, even though the railway station is long gone, the bridge is still very much in use, but it's now carrying road traffic. The only wheels to be seen on the old Green Air site are now attached to skateboards and BMX bikes, or those to be seen cycling along the ever-extending River Loon Millennium Park, and on the old Hornby goods crane that acts as a reminder of the station's past history. Lancaster has much more to offer, and I've not had time to include its more recent industrial heritage and the debt it owes to manufacturing benefactors such as Ashton, Story and Williamson. Without them, there would have been no work in the city, as we are witnessing now in the 21st century, as all their factories and mills have been closed down. So now it is time to move down our tidal river as we're getting nearer to our journey's end, and to explore some more of the Loon Valley's hidden treasures. Now Saltmarsh and the embankment that used to carry the railway to Glasson Dock flank the river. Here at the ancient Golden Ball pub are told tales of 18th century press gangs. The pub is known locally as Snatchums, so beware when the geese head for home as the sun begins to set. And on the other side of the river, Ashton Hall, now the home of Lancaster Golf Club, but once the home to the Dukes of Hamilton and later Lord Ashton. When Turner painted Heysham on the shores of Morecambe Bay, he surely recognised it as one of the most picturesque villages in the area. The villagers seem to take pride in their village, and it's now becoming quite a tourist attraction. 17th century cottages, antique shop, tea rooms, and the traditional English pub, the Royal Hotel, built in 1502, line the village's main street. It even has its own well, but perhaps the waters might not be all that beneficial in this day and age. The village, as we will see, is full of antiquity, but the first port of call should be the little heritage centre. Staffed by really helpful volunteers, it's a very good introduction to the history of Heysham, the surface of which we will only scratch, I'm afraid. St. Peter's Church, with its stunning views across Morecambe Bay to the Lake District, seems to have escaped the ravages of Cromwell and his mob, and in doing so preserved a stunning wealth of history. The Victorians, with their restoration fever, did not detract from the charm and ambience of this Grade 1 listed building. It is a very special place.
Christianity has been in Heysham for at least 1,500 years, and it's been a religious site long before that. This church has been here for just over 1,000 years, consecrated in 967. The original church is the nave, and the things worth seeing inside it, in the main of the hogback stone, which is a Viking gravestone, and that was carved somewhere between 930 and 970, and it shows two scenes from Viking mythology, the story of Sigmund and the story of his son Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. Over on the far side of the church is the Crusader Stone, which was a grave cover on the north side of the church when the north aisle was built. Outside the church is a stone coffin, which was dug up from under the floor inside the church in 1864. And in it was a skeleton which was clasping a communion chalice to his chest. And that communion chalice is in a little panel on the inside of the church wall. Other things of interest are the gravestones of William Ward, who was a rector at the time of Oliver Cromwell, and two other rectors who were buried in the part of the church that was later extended. Near the church gate is a stone with a carving on it known as the Lazarus Stone. It's got a house front with a shrouded figure in the doorway, which I think could be the figure of Christ in the sepulchre. On the reverse side of it is another figure which could be either Christ in judgment or Madonna and Child. The other parts of the cross are to be seen in the walls of the porch. There's the head of another cross beside the pathway, which in 1696 was made into a sundial until the pointer and the plaque on the top of it were removed some years ago. The font is thought to date from the 15th century. The bowl is particularly noteworthy because it's of a different kind of stone to the local stone of which the rest of the church is built. Where it came from, nobody knows.
It's quite plain to see that St. Peter's Church was added to over the many centuries. A filled-in Saxon door seems to be at different levels from inside and outside the church. This is because several people were buried inside the church, with the result that the floor level was raised. It's these idiosyncrasies which gives St. Peter's Parish Church its added charm. Heysham Head is a natural lookout point, and remains going back to the Neanderthal times have been found. Hopefully the National Trust will eventually acquire the whole headland so that it's protected forever. On the promontory, only a few yards away from St. Peter's Church, is a ruined building, and it's said that this church, dedicated to St. Patrick, dates from 800 AD. It is rumoured that St. Patrick was shipwrecked here on his journey to Scotland. It could be Anglo-Saxon or older. No one really knows. But it is these that really get people excited, the rock-cut graves. Who made them? Who are they for? Why have some got marker post holes? One thing is certain. They must have been for very important people of their time. Could this have been a Celtic centre of learning, such as in Llantwit Major in South Wales? Who knows? The saints worked in mysterious ways. But one thing remains, in our continuing thirst for knowledge, this story still has no ending. In nearby Overton, many of the 17th and 18th century houses were built from stone from Cockersands Abbey on the edge of Morecambe Bay. The village is old enough to have been mentioned in the Domesday Book, and its livelihood seems to have revolved around fishing, the estuary and farming. It's also said that about 300 years ago, raw cotton that was brought in from the Americas was spun in these houses. On the highest point is St. Helen's Church, the oldest in Lancashire. This Saxon church was once a chapel to St. Mary's in Lancaster, and is yet another treasure chest of our social heritage. The Saxon west wall is almost 4 feet thick, but it is the Norman south doorway from about 1120 that immediately catches the eye, with its niche that once contained a statue. Inside, it's a most unusual shape in that in 1830 an extra gallery and vestry was added, and unfortunately it means that the cruciform shape does not allow some worshippers to see the altar. However, it has a beautiful 18th century canopied pulpit that makes up for this rather unfortunate extension, and the beautiful 19th century font. A truly beautiful and serene place of worship. The view from the churchyard gives a clue as to our penultimate port of call. There were lots of navigational problems having the port of Lancaster so far upriver, and it was decided in 1779 by the port commissioners to build a dock nearer to the sea. It took 8 years before Glasson Dock was completed. Glasson Dock became a serious threat to the trade of both Sunderland Point and the quayside of Lancaster itself. With a tidal dock of nearly 3 acres, it could cater for 25 ships of most sizes. The Lancaster Canal was dug through from Golgate in May 1826, and later, the new quay built. It meant goods had direct access to the national canal network, and now the quays in Lancaster were virtually redundant. At the Canal Basin Lock, authority passes from Lancaster Port Commissioners to British Waterways. It's interesting to note that the lock has double gates at the upper end because at very high tides the water in the dock can actually be higher than the canal basin. The basin is now a marina for yachty types and for narrow boats. It's always full of activity. The single sea lock gate gives direct tidal access to the river from the new quay. Today the quay is very much a working harbour, with the historic Victoria Terrace providing port offices and housing. One little mystery: is this the smallest lighthouse in the country? The River Loon is famous for its salmon, and the port of Lancaster Smokehouse makes good use of any that are caught. The traditional smokehouse uses only natural woods such as oak and beech, and sources their products locally.
This is fresh wild salmon that has been caught off the River Loon this morning. They came off the tide about 20 minutes ago. These are the best that you can buy in wild salmon, i.e. they come off the river straight into the smokehouse. We buy all the fish off the river. We have about 12 fishermen that fish for us in season. Season runs from the beginning of June till the end of August. These fish now have come in, so the first step is to do what we do is gut them, like so. Then once we've gutted them, they'll go into cure. They're in cure for at least 12 hours, i.e. overnight. Then once they come out of cure in the morning, what we do is we wash them off. They'll go into into a brine. Once they've been into brine for an hour, we will tray them up. Then they'll go into the smokers. But first we have to do the messy job, which is to clean the fish. Right, so that's one fillet that we've taken off. You turn the fish over. You take the opposite fillet off. Absolutely gorgeous, wild salmon. The smoking of the produce that we do dates back for over 300 to 400 years ago. Methods of curing and smoking haven't changed that much, but the equipment that we use for the smoking of the produce has. We have 2 different types of methods of smoking in the smokehouse. We have 2 kilns that we use for cold smoking and 2 kilns that we use for hot smoking. The difference is a cold smoked product is cured and smoked over a burning ember, which gives no heat, so the product is effectively raw but cured. And the hot smoked product is the same process, but we use heat while we're smoking it, so it'd be eating like poached smoked salmon.
But now it is time to leave what is said to be the oldest existing tidal dock in England to make our final port of call on our journey to the sea. To get to Sunderland Point means crossing Overton Marsh and making sure that you note the state of the tide. Twice every day, the road and the village is cut off at high tide. Having said that, this section is a mecca for watching the seabirds and other wildfowl. Sunderland Point was the original port of Lancaster. From mid-17th century, some prominent Lancaster Quakers had developed trade with Africa and the West Indies. And it was because of the burgeoning West Indies, and then the Virginian and East Coast American trade, that Sunderland Point saw the arrival of the first bale of American cotton to be landed and stored in England in about 1700. Sunderland Point enjoyed considerable prosperity for over 100 years, until St George's Quay in Lancaster and Glastondock were built. Until a legal quay was agreed in around 1700, the largest sailing ships would tie up to tall mooring posts and offload into carts or smaller boats for transfer either to the local or to Lancaster warehouses. The two terraces that make up the hamlet were once nearly all warehouses. For many years, a cotton tree grew in Sunderland Point, and tourists came from miles around to see it. Only it wasn't a cotton tree. It seems now that it was probably a black poplar. There are signs now that the stump is actually beginning to grow again. Naturally, tales of smuggling and illicit beer brewing and selling abound, and it is said that young boys earn their pocket money by keeping an eye on the road across the marshes for outsiders. There is much to discover about almost every house in Sunderland Point. The last field in the hamlet is slowly losing about 1 metre every year to erosion by the sea. But before it disappears forever, there's one final tale to be told. Should you visit the hamlet and see a young child carrying a painted stone, or someone carrying a bunch of wildflowers, follow them, because you'll be well rewarded. You'll see these tokens placed on a grave, Sambo's grave. Local people keep alive the memory of a Negro who came as a slave servant from the colonies in 1736, but who was also taken ill and died at a local inn whilst his master travelled to Lancaster on business. Because he was a heathen, he was not allowed to be buried in consecrated ground, so the local sailors dug a grave for him in a nearby field. Many myths have grown up about Sambo in the last 200 or more years, but in these days of childish political correctness, and where you only get accused of racism if you're white, where common sense seems to be confined to the dustbin of life, it is wonderful to state quite unequivocally that the memory of Sambo is alive and flourishing. In a tiny little hamlet, Sunderland Point, where the waters of our river, the River Loon, finally empty into the majestic space that is Morecambe Bay.